Get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the most awesomest homesteading channel on the entire planet Earth, if not the whole solar system, potentially the entire galaxy and universe, that has nothing whatsoever to do with homesteading. Homesteading off the grid. Well, it's almost dark, and ordinarily, as of late, I've not been coming up here and telling stories in this forest because we are right where field meets forest. This time of day is when day meets night. This is when the veil grows thin, and some really spooky stuff has been known to happen here. That's what get my 6 means. It means watch my back. It's a military term. So, but the reason I'm here is because, well, it's trash night. True story. So it's trash night. So this is the one night a week when I take my, my garbage bin way down to the road, down there at the end of our 150-yard long driveway or whatever. And very early in the morning, they'll get the trash. So I'm down there putting out the trash can, and this truck is coming around the turn, and he slows, and he pulls over in the driveway across from our house. Now, I've been seeing this gentleman out here the whole time I've lived here. I've been here almost 8 years, and I see his truck. I know his truck. I run every morning, or I bike, I cycle. So I know people by sight, but he's one of the folks that live out here that I've never met. But, I mean, for 8 years, he's waved at me. I've waved at him. Seen him a couple times a week for 8 years. And if I'm running or cycling, he always slows down and makes sure to give me a wide berth. Very respectful guy. He's probably 70-ish, close to mid to late 60s, maybe 70-ish. So he pulls over, and I'm thinking, oh, great. He's finally just going to introduce himself, wants to meet me, because that's what I've found. Like, I live out in the country, and folks are very standoffish at first, and by first, I mean like for 6 or 7 years. But if you come out, you move out here, and you don't make an ass of yourself in any way, and you do your time. It's like after 6 or 7 years, a lot of what I call generational locals will actually just start talking to you. It's like they ignore you and act like you're not there. Like, oh, there's another yuppie, moving out here into the country from Charlottesville. And it's like, if you're not from the country here in the county outside of Charlottesville, you may as well be from New York City. I mean, I've got a buddy that lives back here in the woods behind me. He's the caretaker of our property when we're gone for the winter, whether we're in the Philippines or this winter we're thinking about going to Greece. But even him, he's from the county, but he's not from this little community. So it's like he's from New York too. But he's been out here long enough to where they're finally talking to him as well. So sorry for the sidebar, but I think it will help you appreciate the story a little bit more. So the guy pulls over across the road from me as I'm taking my garbage bin down to the side of the road there on trash night. I'm thinking, oh, great. Another generational local has finally accepted me because I've been here for 8 years. He's going to tell me his name, get mine. But he pulls over and he turns his truck off, which let me know he wanted to talk for a little bit longer than it would take just to get each other's names, right? He says, "You're that internet guy, right?" And of course I said yes, because I've gotten used to that. I'll be in town or I'll be at a, football game, coaching a football game. I've had refs run up to me and say, "Hey, coach, you're that guy on Facebook that tells all those funny jokes, right?" I'm like, "Well, yeah." Or I've been in town and say, "Hey, you're that YouTube guy that talks about Bigfoot Sasquatch, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." So when he says, "You're that internet guy, right?" I figured it was just a combination of all that stuff. And I say, "Yeah." And he says, "I've got a story for you. Do you mind if we spend about 5 minutes together?" I said, "Not at all." I said, "But let me tell you this." I says, "The guy across the road where you're parked is a jerk. That's Mr. J from the infamous running off an annoying neighbor with crayon fame." I said, "Why don't you pull your truck over here in my driveway. I said, better yet, we can go up and sit on the front porch, and I can go in the house and get some cold iced tea, you know, because we're in the South. It's Virginia. Sweet tea, we call it, which is like iced tea with a lot of sugar in it, like way too much. That's why half of us have diabetes. I mean, not me, but, you know, the other half that's not me. He says, no, I don't want to put you out. So he pulls over across the road, parks in my driveway. He says, I got a story for you. He says, and I don't care if you tell it, but you can't mention my name. He says, don't mention where I live. And I said, yeah, I know where you live. And I said, yeah, because, you know, I mountain bike by there all the time. He says, yeah, that's my place. So here's the story. Basically, this guy is 4th or 5th generation generational local. So this goes back to the late 1800s. His family's been out here since the late 1800s. So he's got a couple hundred acres. And this is how it works. You know, these folks, they started out with like 1,000 acres. Then the next generation comes, they give half to them and then cut that in half. Then the government started charging these estate taxes when people would die. And then they had to get half the value to the government. They had to sell off the family land. Most of it turned into subdivisions. But we're blessed out here where I live because most of these folks have put their land in what's called conservation easement, which means that for the next 1 century, 100 years, nobody can build on that land for residential, like mass residential / commercial purposes. So basically, it's got to stay farmland. And I talk to my CPA about this every year when I go in, taking him all my tax stuff, and he tells me how many tens of thousands of dollars I got to send to the IRS, even though I've sent them tens of thousands of dollars, you know, before that, because the income the revenue just keeps going up. I want to preserve my property in a conservation easement just so nobody can build a yuppie-ass subdivision on it. But he's like, no, it makes hell for the next generation. That might have been true for the boomers who were just waiting for the World War II generation to die so they could sell out and cash out and pay off their debt, increase their FICO score, and go back in debt again, twice-fold. But I think it's different for the younger generations who just want to appreciate country life and aren't concerned with stuff, you know. Gosh, what a tangent. I have a tendency to get off on those, don't I? For those of you who have been watching me for a long time. So anyway, the guy says, listen. He says, here's my story. It's pretty simple. So, like most folks that live in the country, that have acreage, that have orchards like us, 80 or 100 fruit trees, that have gardens like us, you know, we grow corn, beans, asparagus. I mean, sometimes it actually grows. I mean, that's how we started this channel, Homesteading Off the Grid. That was our plan. Let's homestead and showcase it. And it's like we got popular because of our failures. It's like nothing, like we suck at growing anything. We have brown thumbs, but we got like whatever. Then all this weird stuff would happen in the background back here. But we're still trying. We just don't show you our gardens because pretty much they suck. I mean, we do attempt to homestead, but we suck at it, okay? So anyway, the guy's like, you know, like most folks that live out in the country, grow these things, gardens, orchards, we have a problem with deer. There's a lot of deer around here. You see them dead all over the road from where the people hit them with their cars. One time during the winter, we counted 42 deer at one time together in our yard. This is when they yard up in the winter. They call it yarding. It's when the deer get together to look for food. So he says, like most folks who live out here in the country, he has what's called a damage permit. And what that means is basically he can legally hunt deer year round. Now, he told me he's an avid hunter. He loves to hunt bucks in the fall during the rut, which is like November, late October, early to mid-November. But pretty much throughout the year, he will harvest deer because they destroy his orchards. I mean, this guy's got a big piece of property up there. And I don't know, he didn't tell me this, but I think he supplies a lot of the vendors at the local farmers market because he's got to. I've seen his orchards. He's got tons of apple trees, peach trees. He's got gardens. unless if like they're canning that stuff, which could be. I mean, he's a country guy, right? So, but he told me, he says he kills about a dozen deer a year out of season just because of the damage they do on his crops and his orchard. But he and his family do eat them, okay? Him, his wife, his kids are grown now. I think he said his kids are close to my age. So maybe he's a little bit older than I. Well, 70, I'm 50. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. So, you know, he gives deer to his kids, his grandkids. All right, so he says that yesterday, because this story I'm telling you about happened just last night. So yesterday, he decided he would go out and sit in his deer stand. He hunts with a crossbow on this one side of his property because there are some yuppies that bought the neighboring property. And he described the yuppie types that live there. And it's really odd. Let me tell you, we live right outside of Charlottesville, Virginia, Albemarle County, Virginia. It's a unique place. I love it. I absolutely love it. And there are all kinds here. I love the diversity, you know, and especially since we're like a biracial, multicultural family. You know, my wife's Filipina, my son's Filipino-American. And by the way, in case you missed it, this past weekend, as of this recording, my wife, dearly, my beautiful bride, aka Giggly Girl, became a United States citizen. So she is now a citizen. And today, as of this recording, she voted in her first election ever. She was fortunate enough to get her citizenship only 3 days before an election, and she went and voted. And she's going to vote in November. This is a big thing for our family. She's going to get a U.S. passport very soon. We're doing the paperwork for that this week. So we will be able to travel the world. You know, somebody left a comment on a video I made about this the other day. And they said, why would anybody want to become a citizen of this country? And they were going on bitching and complaining about America. And I replied in that comment, go spend a year in any third world country of your choice and come back and then let's have this conversation again. I'll tell you, if you were born and raised here and you grew up here and you don't know what it's like to have a need that you don't know is going to be met. And listen, I know there's times that people don't have money. They don't have food. We've got resources here where you can get that taken care of. The rest of the world doesn't. You know, 80% of the world's population lives on $2 a day. And that's what it's like where my wife comes from. You know, when she gets that U.S. passport, I mentioned earlier, spending next winter in Greece, maybe. We might go to the U.S. Virgin Islands. When you have a U.S. passport, you can go anywhere in the world without requesting a visa before you go there. And when you land at the airport, you just go through customs and go through his immigration. They give you a stamp. No questions asked. As a Filipino resident, if we wanted to go to Greece, we would have to apply for a visa for her. It would take up to 2 years for her to get approval, and we would only get approval if she proved that she had at least $10,000 in the bank. Because they don't, listen, established nations don't want people from third world countries coming into the nation and then just disappearing. And then going out there and getting on their social benefit programs, all right? So that's something we never have to worry about again. We've got a passport to the world now that she's a U.S. citizen. And we're going to take advantage of that. So anyway, back to my story, because this is a Bigfoot Sasquatch story. So anyway, this guy says some yuppies moved in beside him. And this is my point to that. Most places around the U.S., if you're in a rural area, most of the folks that live out there they're country people. They're rural, the country. They garden, they hunt, they fish. They sit outside and drink lemonade or ever sweetened iced tea or a cold beer on a Friday night. You know, have their bonfires. But in Albemarle County, right outside of Charlottesville, you'll get a lot of yuppies move into the country. And I mean, the guy, he told me, he says, I don't know why they do it. And kind of, I don't know why either. Because if you're scared to live in the woods, if you're afraid to live in the woods, if you don't appreciate a country lifestyle, why would you live in the country? The answer is, for a lot of folks, Number one, this is another great thing about America. We all have the right to live wherever we want to live, right? Number two, there's a lot of pretentious snobs in the area who like to move out into the country so they have people to look down on, those people being rural country folks. So he tells me these yuppies move in beside him about 5 years ago. And the first thing they do is they come over, they introduce themselves, and they say, there sure are a lot of deer out here, aren't there? And he says, yeah, there sure are. Because listen, they're overpopulated. Because most of the land out here is privately owned, and most folks don't hunt them, and they don't let other people hunt on their land. So they're everywhere. They think hunting is cruel. To shoot a deer is cruel. But to hit it with your Mercedes Benz and let it fall into the ditch and spend 6 hours dying somehow is not, okay? So he says, there's a lot of deer around here. He's like, yeah, there is. He goes, oh, it would be such a shame if people were to hunt them. They're so wonderful to watch. And he's like, thinking, what? And I told him, I said, yeah, man, I had some yuppies move in beside me. Same thing. First time they come over. It's pretty much the same thing. He's like, listen, internet guy, we harvest deer and we eat them. It's free meat. And especially now that, you know, a sack of groceries cost $300 when a year and a half, 2 years ago was $150. He's like, my family's not going to stop harvesting these deer that destroy our crops. And they're not dying in vain because we are eating them. I'm like, yeah, I get it. But I guess these yuppies they're very pretentious, very snobbish, and they would talk down to this guy. So after about a year of them intruding on him and talking down to him, he pretty much told him to F off and don't come back over. And I told him, yeah, I've had a similar experience. I mean, 90% of my neighbors are wonderful people. The hay collector and there's some yuppies over here that suck. They suck. Those yuppies and the hay collectors. The hay collector. Everybody else are wonderful people, right? So when he pretty much told those yuppies to just screw off, they put all these no trespassing signs up. They put like string. He said they tied like string on their property line, right? They didn't put up a fence. They just tied like a string. It's like, don't cross this line. He's like, okay, whatever. But he said, thank God they stopped coming over to talk down at him, you know. And I said, yeah, I can relate. Very similar situation. So yesterday evening, he was out deer hunting. He was in one of his tree stands. It happened to be about a couple hundred yards away from those yuppies' property line. They're dinks, dual income, no kids. He explained to me they're like 60, associated with the university to some degree, University of Virginia somehow, living out in the country, so they can tell all these country bumpkins just how ignorant they are. You know, you're ignorant, I'm better than you because I have a master's. Now pay for my college degree. I know, right? So anyway, he, just before dark, about half an hour before dark, had a deer coming up the trail. We shot it, and the deer took off running into the woods, and it laid down, and he figures, well, okay, give it about 5 minutes. It'll, you know, it's going to be dead. So he goes out there, starts walking toward the deer to harvest it, but the thing got up. It had like one of those adrenaline rushes, and it goes about another 40 yards, which was about 20 yards onto that yuppie's property, and then it collapsed dead. So he's looking at it, and he's like, wow, great. And these yuppies put cameras like everywhere. It's like, because they're terrified to live in the woods, right? Terrified to live with all these country bumpkins. Gee, go figure. You go around insulting people, being passive-aggressive, narcissistic, sociopath, insulting them, and then you're scared to live beside them? Wow. So they got cameras everywhere. So he's like, what do I do? Because he said he didn't want the deer to go to waste. I mean, that was a month's worth of meat for his family. You know, and in this current economic environment, like we've not seen since the 1970s, where prices have literally doubled in the last 18 months to 2 years, where I hope to God we replace our current lawmakers in November because of this nonsense. Historically, we have voted our pocketbooks. I hope that's true this fall, FYI. So he says, well, what do I do? I can't go over there on those yuppies' property because even though it's just a drag of deer over here, there's 20 yards on their property, he says. But they'll cause such a stink. They'll probably call their police friends out here and just blah, blah, blah. He said it's a headache I didn't want. So he said, you know, I'll wait till dark. I'll wait until dark, and I know this land like the back of my hand because that yuppie's property used to be one of his friend's property, and he used to hunt on it. He says, no big deal. I'll wait until dark, and I'll go over there and get that deer and drag it over here and gut it out and take it home and skin it and clean it and whatever. So he did that. He waited till about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and he went out into the woods, not using any light, you know, because he didn't want to alert the yuppies. And but he did have a light in his pocket. So he says he's getting close to where he knew that deer was, and he hears something moving around. He's thinking, well, you know, it's either a fox or maybe a possum or a raccoon, any sort of scavenger like that. It's like, whatever it is, it's going to be afraid of me, and it's going to run as I get close. So he gets even closer, he gets even closer. He gets about, you know, 10 yards, 12, 10 yards, but the thing's still there. He hears it crunching around in the leaves. And he's thinking, I'm at the top of the food chain. Whatever this is, he says, I can't see it, but I know it can see me because it's nocturnal. It's going to run when I get to that deer. So he creeps forward even more, a little slowly, even more. And he gets right up to that deer. Even though it was dark and there was the canopy of the forest overhead, there was enough light from the moon to where he could see the white of the belly and the white of the deer tail. But he hears crunch, crunch. And he figures, you know what? The yuppie's got me. This is one of the two yuppies. It's either the, you know, he doesn't know how to refer to them as him or her, he or she, with the whole pronoun thing, because the yuppies are like really into that right now. And they get really offended if you misgender or mispronoun them. So he says, I know that one of the yuppies were right there. They clearly either saw, you know, they saw me shoot that thing out of the window, or one of the cameras picked me up. So he says he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out his flashlight and he says, yeah, okay, you got me. Okay, you got me. So where do we go from here? And he clicks the button to turn on the light, and standing there, hovering over him, is this 8 feet tall, 600-pound behemoth with a freaking deer leg in its mouth. And he's like, oh my God. Duh. I was like, what'd you do? He says, I turned the light back off immediately and I backed away. He says, I walked all the way back to my property backwards, the same way I'd gone in there, but backwards. He said, I never turned the light back on. I never went back down there. Let her F that deer. The thing could have it. And that's pretty much it. He went in the house and he locked the door and he told his wife, and she said he was crazy. And that's part of the reason he wanted to talk to me. He said he knew tonight was trash night because he uses the same garbage disposal company I do. So he figured at some point I would be taking my trash to the curb. And so he said he's been driving up and down the road past my house for the last hour or so, waiting to see me taking the trash out to the curb. And he finally did, and so he was glad he caught me, and he could tell me that story. It's crazy. And he told me in all the years he's lived here, and again, 4th or 5th generational local, he's never seen anything like that. He's never heard anybody tell any stories like that. And he said he's been watching me for years on the internet, and he's heard my stories and I thought I was making them up, or he thought maybe I was reading them somewhere and then just retelling them. But he says that he now believes, he now knows that there are things in our vicinity that aren't supposed to exist, but clearly do, because he was face to face last night with one. So, I hope you enjoyed this story. It's almost dark, and as the crow flies, that property isn't a mile and a half away from mine. So with that said, I think I'm going to go in the house and lock the doors. See y'all for more next time from here, the greatest homesteading channel on the entire planet and solar system and universe and all that, etc., et al. That has nothing to do with homesteading off the grid. See you next time for more.